Hello, Southeast sports fans. I'm Hanna Barton, joined by Brenden Schaeffer. Time to preview your 2025 Texas Longhorns. And the best way to put it is there is a lot of talk around Texas, and not just Texas, but one player in particular. His name might sound a little bit familiar, and that is Arch Manning. Brenden, you ever heard of Arch Manning by any chance?
Y- it sounds familiar. I might have to Google him to remember who this guy actually is. No, this is the guy when it comes to quarterbacks in college football this year. Is he going to be the very best one? We're going to see, but certainly he's got the biggest name of all of them.
Yeah, a big name, lots of big expectations for Texas. 13-3 last season. They went to the SEC championship game where they lost to Georgia, and they actually lost to Georgia in the regular season as well. So we'll get into that a little bit later about how the Dogs may just be their kryptonite. They ended their season in the Cotton Bowl, lost to Ohio State. Obviously, he went on to be national champions, but yeah, Texas has a lot of weight on their shoulders. Their second full season in the SEC, and they're already kind of considered one of those SEC powerhouses, and they've got the talent to kind of back it up. Again, Arch Manning is the big focal point of conversation, especially when it comes to this Texas offense. When we were at SEC Media Days, though, there were a lot of interesting conversations around Arch Manning. What exactly are his capabilities? How will he handle the pressure? And what is kind of a realistic expectation of what we're going to see from Arch Manning this season as a full-time starter for Texas?
Is it reasonable, though, that we can kind of look at this player and say, you know what? We don't need to be realistic. We can be crazy when it comes to this guy. For one reason, he's got the weapons there in Austin to do some really special things this year. He doesn't have to be the top quarterback talent in the conference to be the best producing quarterback in the conference, in my opinion. When you've got Wisner back at running back, and you've got guys like Ryan Wingo and a host of receivers that are going to be difference makers once again for Texas. I think as long as Arch Manning kind of does his job and stays within himself, it's kind of going to unfold for him like the yellow brick road all the way to Oz, which could be a national championship this year for Texas. Like, I know that is what the expectation would be in Austin for this team. Got pretty close last year and wasn't able to get over the hump with an Ohio State team that was just really, really good and dominant, especially down the stretch. I don't think anybody was surprised at the way that played out, but now you're going with a different quarterback, right? Quinn Ewers is moving on to, I don't know if it's greener pastures for him. Time will tell on that, but I think Texas was ready to install the Arch Manning era, and it begins now in earnest. You mentioned SEC Media Days. I thought the way that he sort of handled himself and said, hey, look, I haven't really done anything yet to have all this kind of praise heaped on me. I think he's going to have more of a workman-like attitude in terms of going out there and proving himself a little bit. When we saw him in spells last year, it was often for specific packages, and we saw the dude can lower the shoulder and loves to play with an edge and run the football. Maybe not much like his uncles in that regard. This dude's a physical presence. I think that's going to be an exciting aspect that he brings to the table that tells me, look, there's hype around Arch Manning, but he's like the perfect type of guy to be able to live up to that hype because of the way he approaches the game.
A Manning that can move is just an exciting idea. And like you mentioned earlier, he doesn't necessarily have to, although we know that he has the potential to be this great star. A lot of people that we've talked to that have followed this Texas team closely have said he doesn't need to be anything other than just enough to operate this offense. And one thing that they pointed out was we know he's got talent, but how can he handle mistakes? How can he handle the lows and the high pressure situations that come with being the starting quarterback at the University of Texas? Now, luckily for him, he's got some great people to learn from on that regard. But then also, like we said, he's got some great weapons. I mean, this Texas backfield is super promising. They return Quintravion Wisner, who he took over duties last season after CJ Baxter went out in the preseason, rushed for over 1,000 yards, made 44 catches. And then CJ Baxter is expected to be healthy. They haven't said whether he's going to be maybe at 100% come first game, but the idea of having that duo in the backfield is enough to really maybe let Arch Manning take a breath and know that, all right, as long as I don't mess it up, don't try and do too much, which is sometimes we can see from these younger quarterbacks that have as much talent as Arch Manning, that this team is going to be a real contender for a national championship. And we haven't even touched on the defense yet.
The defense was a huge strength of last year's team, Hanna. And it's funny, though, you mentioned it kind of sounds like you're talking about Arch Manning, game manager. We'll see if that ends up being the case. And again, if you have a game manager that can run the way that he can run, can lower the shoulder, can be a team leader there in the huddle, I think he has all of the tangibles and intangibles to be what Texas needs him to be this year. But that's partially because of how explosively talented we know this defense to be. Last year, the defense for Texas was elite, especially in the secondary. It was kind of a no-fly zone. You had the most total interceptions, tied for the most with 22. They're seventh in passing yards allowed. They only allowed 173 yards per game through the air, and they were one of three teams in this division of college football to allow fewer than 10 passing touchdowns on the other side. And you're bringing guys back like Malik Muhammad, like Michael Taffy, and Jalen Gilbo. Like, they have a secondary that was elite of elite last year, and they're basically returning a lot of the key players from that group.
And I think that's really going to be an edge for Texas moving into the season, because as we look at some of these more SEC teams, one thing that they've had, especially the ones that maybe had a little bit more of inconsistency on the offense, is that they had really strong defenses that are going to look a lot different this year, where Texas is returning. Like we said, there's standouts on the secondary. And of course, we can't forget Anthony Hill Jr., who's considered possibly one of the best linebackers in the country. And the season hasn't even started yet. 113 tackles and 8 interceptions last season. So not only do they have a great secondary, but they've got an absolute superstar in the linebacker room. And so this Texas defense, I think, is going to be something, especially the first few games, as Arch Manning starts to figure things out, that they're going to rely on. And as you can see, as you pulled up that schedule, it's going to be a huge test. I think that's an understatement to say it's a huge test right out the gate.
Yeah, that is one that you circle on your calendar, and it kind of feels weird for that game against Ohio State to be happening in August, but there's going to be a want to get their lick back for the Texas Longhorns after the loss in the playoff last year. That's going to be, look, a tone-setting game to the season. It doesn't impact, obviously, the conference standings, and in a bit, we'll talk a little bit about win total expectations and what we really see as possible or probable for the Longhorns this year. But that one, I mean, what a way to start off the college football season. That is going to be an absolute blast against Ohio State up there in Columbus.
And I think when you look at that Ohio State game, and again, it's at Columbus on the road, I think this is going to be a perfect way to rip the Band-Aid off for Arch Manning, because
Yeah.
chances are there's going to be some sort of errors, whether they're minor, whether they're game altering. Of course, we never want to put it all on one player, but he is the quarterback of the University of Texas with the last name of Manning. So what else can we expect? But it's a great way to rip the Band-Aid off, whether it's he comes out and he's an absolute stud, or he has the worst game of his life. It's how is he going to handle it when you have a whole full season of football to play after a game against the team that knocked you out of the national championship contention last year.
Yeah, that's gonna be must see television. Little bit probably strange to have that game at 11 a.m. I know Ohio State fans up there are like tired of the 11 a.m. kickoffs for their marquee games, but we will be seated, as they say, for this one, wherever you may be. Texas, Ohio State, one of the marquee games of the season.
Yeah, all that 11 a.m. kickoff tells me is that they don't know how we do things down in the SEC, that's for sure. But we're going to have the chance to hear more about this Texas team from some of the experts that we talked to at SEC Media Days. Kylie Hansen's going to have more for you guys on that.
Thanks, Hanna. We got to talk to Erin Hogan, who's been covering Texas for a very long time. He said that if Texas can step up their run game this year, that they should have a successful season. But a successful season for this Texas team is on a very, very high bar. It's a national championship. Let's hear from Erin.
Big expectations around this Texas team, obviously. So kind of what does success look like for Texas this season?
National championship. I mean, I think that would be, it wouldn't be a failure if they don't win it, but that's the bar this year after back-to-back semifinal losses in the Sugar Bowl 2 years ago, in the Cotton Bowl last year at Ohio State. I think in that Cotton Bowl last January, the best two teams in the country played, and it was a 14-point spread, but Texas was at the 1 yard line with a chance to tie the game, and the strip sack fumble, and we all saw that. So I think they were very, very close last year with a very veteran team and a veteran quarterback, and now they come back even, I think, more talented on defense, rebuilt a little bit on offense, but with Arch Manning and an idea that they've been this close for the last couple of years, and I think there's a team mindset that the success is winning the whole thing.
Right. So let's talk about Arch Manning. He's obviously getting a lot of talk in the media, a lot of pressure, essentially. How do you think he'll do? Do you think first game against Ohio State, he comes out there and what happens?
Well, if their running game is like it was last year, it's not going to be as great as everybody thinks. I mean, that was part of the issue with Quinn Ewers last year. He got banged up, but they couldn't really consistently run the ball against really good defenses, which to win a national title, you're going to see Georgia and you're going to see Ohio State and you're going to see Penn State and the best defenses in the country. You got to be able to run the football, and they're going to get back that. One of the big injuries last year for Texas was Cedric Baxter, C.J. Baxter, their 5-star running back from Florida. He got hurt in training camp last year and really hurt their offense the whole year long. They did not have a big power back. Cedric was a starter as a freshman, and he was the first freshman to start his first game at Texas since Ricky Williams, the Heisman Trophy winner. So super talented guy, and then they lose him. They had a pretty good running game, but really against the middle. They couldn't run the football against Georgia. They couldn't run the football against Ohio State or Clemson. You're going to have to be able to do that. So to your point on Arch, or your question on Arch, if they can run the ball, Arch is going to be fine. Because but this doesn't need to be Arch throwing the ball to win for them to win. This team's going to be anchored around its defense, and they hope a strong running game, and then Arch being a really smart winner at quarterback. That's what they're using his legs where it needs to. I've drawn the parallel that if you saw the Philadelphia Eagles win the Super Bowl last year,
We did.
Arch needs to be Jalen Hurts, right? Mm-hmm. Jalen Hurts averaged under 200 yards passing. He averaged under 50 yards rushing per game, but he didn't turn the ball over. He took some sacks, but he didn't turn it over, and he managed the game. That really is in year one for Arch. That's what he needs to be doing, playing winning football, keeping chains moving. Texas has to execute the red zone better, and I think his legs can help with that a lot. But that's really the key. I mean, I don't think, the Heisman stuff is fine. His name is what it is, but there are some quarterbacks out there that are going to have to carry their team. They're going to have to put up big yardage and big numbers and touchdowns if his team's actually even going to win. Texas, people will sleep on the defense. The defense, kind of like the Philadelphia Eagles, are the number one defense in the NFL. Mm-hmm. They're not going to have to score a ton of points each game. They get into the middle 20s, upper 20s, they're going to be good. And if they don't turn the football over, that'll be a successful year for Arch Manning. So I just think playing winning football, being a part of the collaborative of the offense, and then where he needs to step up and put a cape on and make a play or two, that's really what they need from Arch this year. But not like I would compare it to I think Lenore Sellers at South Carolina. If he doesn't play really, really well, they're going to have a hard time because they don't have the supporting cast everywhere else. Even Garrett Nussmeier maybe at LSU, they need him to be really good. They need Arch to be winning, smart, efficient, good on third down, good in the red zone.
Now, that's put pretty simply, though, and he is playing in the SEC.
Yep.
And doesn't have, as much experience under his belt. What are some growing pains that you think we might see that could be detrimental?
Well, just you can't coach experience. I mean, you can't. You got to learn it, and those kind of things. And there's really good defenses and really good defensive players and good defensive coordinators in this conference that are going to throw looks at him. And he's got the Manning name, and he can lean into his uncles. And he's a gym rat. I mean, that's a strength of his. He loves the game. He's first guy there, so he'll get him fixed. But I would expect Ohio State is going to have some stuff. Matt Patricia, the New York defense coordinator there, will throw some things at him that they're working on all summer long. How does he handle that is going to be important. How does he handle some failure? How does he handle a couple interception game? One of the things I was always appreciative of Quinn Ewers, he could handle a bad game. Mm-hmm. And it's funny because Coach Sark, the quarterback himself, there was the first year that Quinn was starting. There was a couple games where Sark left him in to have a bad game, because they had a quality backup, and there were a lot of people saying, "Well, man, go to the backup, get the win." I said, "Nope, this is part of it. He's got to go through it, and I got to see how he handles it. I got to see how his bad fourth quarter or his bad decision is the reason we lost, and then I need to see. I don't need someone else to make that mistake or bail us out. I need to see him do that, and then how he handles it. Does he?" Throw his teammates under the bus. Arch isn't going to do any of those things, but that's kind of Sark's mindset. He's going to need to see Arch bounce back from some adversity, which I think he'll do fine.
Right. So you talk about, Quinn Ewers going through those rough patches. Well, they lost last year twice to Georgia.
Yep.
Kind of this year, what's a must-win game for them?
Must win? Well, the way I break it down, they're going to be double-digit favorites or close to it in 8 of their 12 games. And so let's just assume they win those 12 because they've taken that step as a program. There's 4 games. There's Ohio State. There's Florida at Florida. There's at Georgia. and then there's the Oklahoma game. I'm not just conceding that they're going to beat A&M at home and Arkansas and all these other games, winning it, on the road. But I think they're going to win those other games. It's going to come down to those four. And I think if you're a Texas fan and you want to get to the tournament and win the whole thing, you want to go 4-0 in those games, but you really need to go 2-2 or 3-1. Because if you go 2-2, even you're 10-2, and now you're in the tournament. 10-2 team probably makes the field of 12, and then you can go from there. So I think the most crucial game, as I look at it, is the Oklahoma game. You got to get that one, because the other three are, with a young quarterback and a young offensive line. Columbus, Ohio, Gainesville, Florida, and Athens, Georgia. I mean, those are losable games. I mean, you have to, and you certainly can't lose all four of them. I mean, you're 8-4, you're not going to make the tournament. 9-3 maybe, but we saw last year that didn't work. So I think that the Oklahoma game has to be won, because I think they'll handle their home games. I think they'll handle the other 8 or the other 7. They win that game, then they find a way to beat one of those other teams, go win in Florida, go win at Ohio State. And, you even take a loss at Georgia, you're in the tournament, probably even in the SEC title game. If you lose in Columbus, you can still bounce back. So I think it's the Oklahoma game every year. But this year, with John Mateer now there and Venables' defense, they were embarrassed last year. It was 34-3, I believe. They'll bounce back. That is a rivalry game. I think it's Oklahoma.
Yeah. You were discussing the defense a little bit ago, and I think, all of the talk about Arch Manning, especially maybe those that don't follow Texas as closely, it's a lot of an Arch Manning conversation, but the defense is the star power here when it comes to this Texas team in a lot of ways. Who are going to be some leaders on the defense this year, since they did lose a couple of those?
They did. No, they lost, Jade Barron, who was such a key contributor. Well, Michael Taft coming back is big, and he'll be here today. Yeah. Michael's great from Austin, played high school ball, won a couple state titles in Austin at Westlake, and he's back, and he's the captain of the defense, along with Anthony Hill, who's I think the premier linebacker in all of college football. He was a 5-star kid out of Denton, Texas, and has lived up to all the billing. He was a freshman All-American. He was outstanding as a sophomore. Now he's a junior. He wears the green dot. He's the quarterback of the defense, and they use him in a lot of ways. And they're going to unleash him as a pass rusher quite a bit this year too, I think. So Anthony Hill, Michael Taft in the back end. There's a safety in the back end named Jelani McCoy out of Waco. Really good player. I think you're going to see him excel. The corners are good. And Manny Muhammad, who is a 5-star prospect. Kobe Black, a 5-star prospect. So those guys. But then, the pass rush. I think this has a chance to be the best pass rush in college football. I mentioned how they're going to use Anthony Hill, but Colin Simmons, who's now a sophomore, he's the best edge player. His ball get off. The BGO is as good as any in the country, and he's going to be a handful. They've got Trey Moore coming back, who's a veteran player who transferred from UTSA a couple years ago. He's now into his second year. They got a transfer from Arkansas, whose name has escaped me, but Brad Spence is his name. He's going to be coming at you. So, if they can hold up and stuff the run, they invested 5 players in the portal at defensive tackle. Murad Watson from Syracuse and Travis Shaw from North Carolina, probably being the biggest. Cole Brevard from Purdue. Yep. Those guys, you're not going to hear their name a ton, but, they got to hold up and stuff the run. They get this thing to passing situations. Texas is going to be tough because they're going to sack the quarterback. They're going to force turnovers and make plays. I think their defense has a chance to be even better this year than it was last year. More athletic this year than it was last year. And if it is, it's one of those type of defenses. You guys know, y'all know the way this goes. The number 1 defense last year was Ohio State. The number 1 defense the year before was Michigan. They won the title. Right. Number 1 defense the previous 2 years was Georgia. They won the national title. That's what Sark has built. People think about him and offense and quarterbacks. He's built he and Pete Kwiatkowski, the defensive coordinator, have built a defense they think can be on par with those I just mentioned. And that's why we go back to Arch Manning. He just has to be smart, manage the game, be a leader, pull out some close ones, and Texas can do some great things. But that defense is really good.
Defense wins championships.
I was going to say, so I would ask who you think is going to win the SEC championship, but if Texas has a number 1 defense, do you think they can go on and win this national championship? I
do. I think they can. I don't know if I'm ready to pick them, but I'm looking for, like we saw Clemson last December in the 12-team playoff in Austin, and they bring a lot back. And I love Cade Klubnik. I covered him in high school. He's a really, really good player. I think he's the best quarterback in the country, pound for pound, to start the year. He can throw, he can run, he's a gamer, he's smart, he makes all the throws. I love Cade Klubnik, and his receivers are back. They got to be able to run the ball, but their defense is young last year. They're a year better, and they stole Penn State's defensive coordinator. So I really like Clemson and Cade Klubnik. I really like Penn State, but can they prove that they can win some big games and beat some good teams? But yeah, I think Texas is right in that conversation. The SEC for me, as you just asked, is interesting. We don't know what to make of Alabama. What are they going to get at quarterback? They're loaded in a lot of the other places. What's Georgia? Has Georgia slid back just a little bit? Is this South Carolina's year to, ride Lenora Sellers to big time thing? Or maybe it's LSU because they do have Nussmeier. They did invest in the portal. This is year 4 for Brian Kelly. So I think Texas is for sure in the SEC championship game. That would be my prediction. And if they get there, I think this is a year they think they can come back and win that and then go from there. But the rest of because I think the teams closest to Texas as far as fewest questions are not in the SEC. I think that's Penn State, Clemson, and maybe LSU. I know they're in the conference, but they're close. But Texas doesn't have a lot of question marks right now.
Yeah. You've been in Austin around this fan base and around this team for quite a while. What is your first assessment of this first full year going to the second year of Texas being in the SEC, especially from the fan base perspective?
Oh, jacked. I mean, they're fired up. Well, because it's the best conference in every sport, but it's also Texas has done very well. When this was announced, I've been on the radio a long time. There were a lot of people saying, "What? We're going where? We're not ready for that," because they weren't a very good football program at the time. They were, there in a couple other sports, but Chris Del Conte, the athletic director, has done a phenomenal job building every program at Texas, hiring elite coaches, giving those coaches the resources and what they need to succeed. And I think that the fan base is just riding it. It probably doesn't get a lot of press, outside of Austin, but the Texas has won 4 of the last 5 Directors' Cups, which is an athletic director's award, which means it's a point system based on success by all the programs. And Stanford had won it for like 30 years because Stanford competes in like 35 or 36 sports. So they would win it every year. Well, Texas has won it 4 out of 5 now. And the question was, that was in the Big 12. Okay, great. You're mopping up on you're Texas. You should be doing that in the Big 12. Well, they did it this year in the SEC. And they, outside of men's basketball where they made a coaching change, everybody else excelled. Every other program, had a really good year, including football. So the fan base is on fire. They're really, really excited. To have Arch Manning, they're getting behind Sark like no one since Mac Brown. And they went through a decade plus. We on the radio went through a decade plus of really bad coaches and just coaches that weren't up to snuff and teams that weren't very good and mediocre football and mediocre leadership and all that comes with that. They're excited because this feels like the golden age and the golden era. I've been doing radio in Austin long enough to remember when the previously great athletic director to Lost Odds hired Augie Garrido at baseball, Rick Barnes at basketball, and Mac Brown at football, all within about a 2-year span. And they had a 10-year run of really, really great sports. And then Mac Brown and Vince Young won a championship. Rick Barnes got to a Final Four a couple times. Augie Garrido won a couple college baseball championships. This feels like that. This feels like they have it. Plus, Chris Del Conte has gotten the entire athletic department. The softball team just won the Natty.
Yeah.
Volleyball is great. First one ever.
Crazy.
Volleyball is great every year now with Jared Elliott. So, I mean, every program. That now Jim Schlossnagel's at baseball. It's really a lot of fun. It's a fun time to be around amid all the change and portals and, house settlements. The athletes on the Texas campus are as good as they've ever been.
All right, and now we're back to talk schedule, get into the nitty gritty, talk about the numbers, the gambling. Brenden, sitting at 9.5 win total right now. What are the odds kind of telling you right now, looking at this Texas team this season?
The odds are telling me we're circling that Ohio State game for one, because a 9.5 win total with all the expectations honestly feels a little bit low, but we know how loaded the SEC is, and Texas doesn't have that easy of a schedule. There's always going to be some tough games regardless of your schedule in the SEC. It's manageable. They do have to play that game against Texas A&M at the end of the year. We remember how memorable that game was last year where they were able to get over the hump against the Aggies. This time you get the game in Austin, you expect to probably be able to win that one. We know that Red River is interesting every year, but Texas right now is on a different plane than OU. So again, you're kind of chalking that one up for the Longhorns, even though we do have to have respect for that as a rivalry game. The Georgia one is a big one, Hanna, when we're talking about this 9.5 number, because I guess there's 3 games on the schedule that I would circle as being legitimately tough for this team. And look, I think Texas will be favored in most of their games this season. But when you talk about at Georgia on November the 15th, we know what happened last year between Texas and Georgia. That's just one of those that you kind of have to get over the hump in if you're the Longhorns, if you want to have those national championship expectations. And I kind of look at the game at Florida on October the 4th as being a little bit sneaky, especially if DJ Lagway could get healthy. I know right now as we're recording this, he's in a walking boot. He's dealing with a lower body injury. But if Lagway can get out there for that game, it's certainly a game that he wanted to participate in last year. It's in the Swamp this time. So, like, you have to kind of pay attention to that. But, man, there's a reason we've got minus 170 odds on over 9.5 wins at DraftKings Sportsbook, because it's hard to really see less than 10 for this Texas team. Let's say Ohio State doesn't go their way. Let's say Georgia doesn't go their way. I just don't have a belief that they're going to find another loss on their schedule, knowing that they have these championship expectations. I'm not saying it's going to be easy to go into the Swamp, and there's no guarantees when you're playing like a rivalry game against the Aggies, but everything else does seem to flow their way. San Jose State, UTEP, Sam Houston, they're keeping a lot of those non-cons in state this year, but that you're going to clean up those games. Ohio State, obviously, you're going to know right off the jump. If you get that Ohio State game, it's going to be really difficult to imagine fewer than 9.5 wins for this Texas team. I mentioned the schedule being tough, but there are a lot of pockets within the schedule that are manageable. Kentucky, yeah, it's a road game, but Kentucky doesn't have high expectations this year. Same for Mississippi State on the road, and you host Vanderbilt and Arkansas as well. So, like, there's a lot of games you kind of roll out of bed at least 6 or 7 wins, and then to be able to clean up a number of the latter games. Look, the defense should be one of the best in the country. We're talking a lot about Arch Manning in this offense. I'm not loving that I have to pay minus 170 odds, but if I'm betting either way on this 9.5, it's got to be over.
And you talked about those pockets of the schedule. And I think a lot of times whenever we're looking at especially SEC schedules, we overlook those pockets because you've got those 3 stretches of home games, that the non-conference games that, I mean, are going to be pretty, I think, walk in the parks essentially for Texas. So they're going to have that little kind of come down chill after Ohio State. Then you rev it up again. You go to Florida, of course, the Red River rivalry, regardless of how Oklahoma is, that's always a rivalry game. So it's one that's going to get everybody amped up, regardless of maybe what it's looking like for Oklahoma this year. We don't know. And then you go away to Kentucky and Mississippi State, which are both very manageable road games. And then Vanderbilt at home is kind of going to be the one I think that might get you a little bit ready, a little bit on edge. And then going to Georgia. I mean, I can't wait for that game. I think Georgia is going to be hungry. Like we mentioned, Georgia got beat by Texas not once, but twice. Or I'm sorry, Georgia beat Texas not once, but twice last season. And now Texas has to go to Georgia and try and see if they can break that curse. And I think, again, that's going to be a really good indication of who's really going to be in this playoff conversation, not just playoff conversation, but the national title game conversation. And then Arkansas at home, again, kind of like all right, we can breathe a little bit, but stay ready. And then Texas A&M rivalry game at home. Again, when we talk about these SEC rivalry games, anytime that you're hosting one at your home field, it's going to look pretty good for you, regardless of where each team is at that point in the season.
I'm also somebody that looks at the game time, and they've got a night game scheduled for that matchup against the Aggies. But conversely, when we talk about the 11 a.m., like, they'll be ready for Ohio State at 11 a.m. You're not first game of the season. There's not going to be any concern about a letdown based on the time of the game. I do look at that November 1st against Vanderbilt, 11 a.m. Like, Texas should easily win that game. But those are the ones, like, we did gloss over a number of these teams that you just want to make sure, if you're Steve Sarkisian, that you are keeping your guys to the task in every single contest. Even the ones at home that happen early in the morning that you feel like should be a piece of cake. When you're playing a conference game, you got to take it serious. But you mentioned, like, Kentucky and Mississippi State are probably 2 of the road games that if you were to spin a wheel and hope that you had them, you're going to take those, because you know that there are some environments that are unavoidable and how difficult they're going to be. And those are just 2 that I think teams that we're not expecting them to really be at the top of their game yet this season. And the process of, what they're going through with their coaches and their recruiting and their programs. So you do have to go to Georgia. What's interesting, though, is, we talk about college football playoff. It is an expanded playoff. There are 12 teams that make it. You could conceivably lose to Ohio State, lose to Georgia, and clean up the rest of your schedule and still be sitting pretty when it comes to the playoffs. So, like, for me, when I think about the expectations of Texas, it's more about national championship than playoff. they're minus 330 with the odds at DraftKings to go to the playoff. That might be one that if I'm going to bet it, it's going to be as part of a parlay where I'm like, okay, I'm going to pick a few different teams that I think can make the playoff, because on its own, yeah, Texas is almost a shoe-in to make the playoff, at least the way that we look at it on paper. But there's not a lot of return on your investment for that if you're just betting it solo. And so you do start to think about the futures board, a couple of different things. Can Texas win this conference? Obviously, you're going to have to get by Georgia to do it, but Texas has the shortest odds. They're the odds-on favorite, if you will, according to DraftKings Sportsbook, to win the SEC championship game at plus 270. I'm not really sure I necessarily care a ton about making sure I'm getting in on that, because, look, they could go and they could lose to Georgia. They could lose to another team that has a great season. Time will tell. SEC championship game, they're plus 130 to make it. I think that's honestly a savvy bet, because I'd be surprised if Texas is not at least in those final two. Remember, one of the games that we're worried about looking at saying it's a toss-up, it's a coin flip, is a non-conference game. So the odds of Texas missing the playoff, or pardon me, missing the SEC championship game, I feel like that would have to be a loss to Georgia, loss to Florida, and even still, there's a chance that you could get in depending on what the other teams do. So I kind of like them to reach the SEC championship game at plus 130. And then everything else there is, of course, can they end up winning a national championship? How far do you think this Texas team could really go this year, Hanna?
I think if you ask them, their mentality is national championship or bust. I think they might not admit it, but I'm sure somewhere in that locker room, 3 or 4 rooms deep, that date of November 15th is circled. And I think a win over Georgia, an SEC championship win, and a national championship is the standard that Texas is holding themselves to this season. I see them playing for an SEC championship. If they're going to get it, it's gonna tell me a lot based off of how they play against Ohio State, just to see how they handle something like that, and then what this game against Georgia looks like. I think those are the 2 games for me that are really going to determine if Texas is going to be your SEC champions for 2025, and then I would be surprised if they don't make a serious run for this national championship, most likely playing for a national championship.
And if I had to pick it today with odds of plus 550, according to DraftKings, Ohio State's also at plus 550 to win the Natty. Georgia's at plus 700. So basically, Texas and Ohio State are tied as the favorites at this point. Whoever wins that game week 1 is going to, vault into being the favorite by themselves. Texas would be my pick to win the national championship. I just believe that they have, and look, Georgia's always going to reload, and so that conversation is going to be there. Ohio State's always going to reload. But when I think about the combination of my confidence in the Longhorns offensively and defensively, I feel like they're going to have the best of both worlds, balance. And look, I thought Quinn Ewers did a nice job last year, but the idea that he kind of were you a little bit limited in terms of the ceiling that you could reach with him. Arch Manning, yeah, I think he'll start the season as taking care of the football, game manager. There will be moments and there will be plays where you see him develop as the year goes along, to where by the time you get to January, I think he'll be capable of making national championship type plays for this team. In fact, if they lose to Ohio State and it's a close game, I'll even be more likely to want to bet the Longhorns to win the Natty then, because I believe people are going to say, oh, they lost to Ohio State. Ohio State's better. I think Texas is going to experience some real growth throughout the season with a quarterback that we haven't seen a lot yet. As of today, don't tell the Georgia fans. I'll have to admit it when we do the Georgia preview. But I'm taking Texas to win the national championship today.
And it's exciting to think about the fact we could see the very first game of the season be a game we could very well see play for the national championship. I mean,
yeah,
how many times do we get to see that? So super exciting, really anxious to see what this Texas team looks like this season. Again, they're one of those new powerhouses of the SEC. We'll follow along with all that action moving forward. But we're going to talk about the other teams as well as Georgia, obviously the next best contender for that SEC championship. But for now, that's your 2025 Texas Longhorns preview. Brenden Schaeffer, Hanna Barton, thanks for joining us. We'll see you guys next time.